How about that E3, huh? This was the best opening line I could think of. Often labeled as Gamer Christmas for some baffling reason, E3 is a pretty big deal despite how apathetic I've grown to this expo. You'd think I would like it more, right? I mean, it's the San Diego Comic-Con of video games. Almost every gaming company meeting in one place to showcase their upcoming games sounds great on paper. On paper, in reality, E3 runs the gambit from alright to a clusterfuck of lies, misinformation, buzzwords, and misdirected hype. It's a week-long commercial that tap dances along the border of false advertising with a shit-eating grin. It's a show entirely reliant on the output of talented developers who are forced to try and sell their game before it's even finished. It's a competition between companies to impress consumers without any consideration for the feasibility of delivering on what's been shown. And yet I watch it every year, willfully. I have and will continue to get up early and stay up really late to watch these press conferences simply because I love video games more than I hate buzzwords. So let's talk about E3 2018 and how bafflingly bad, yet good, but something of a mixed bag, but also kind of alright it was. What can you say about EA's conference that doesn't start or end with the phrase, "what the fucking fuck"? I expect nothing from EA, but I find myself almost always disappointed with what they have to show, and this year was no different. I can count the number of things I liked about this conference on a mutilated hand. It was an absolute joke. EA don't have a fucking clue. This is best exemplified with one of the worst game reveals I've ever seen in my life. What in the world was that shitty mobile game masquerading as Command & Conquer? It's been like 10 years since the last one, and EA's idea for some grand return to form is a mobile game? What the fuck did they expect the reaction to be? And of course, because this is EA, at least a third of the conference was dedicated to sports games. I understand that these games are EA's best-selling titles, but you're not gonna net additional sales by promoting them to people who willfully choose to watch video game press conferences. Oh wow, look at that Champions League Cup. That alone is enough reason to buy FIFA 19. You know, I was on the fence before, but then I saw that cup. The most glaring problem with EA showings this year was an almost complete absence of gameplay. I'm talking actual demos where a person sits down and plays the game. I know that vertical slice demos don't have a reputation for being representative of the final game, but it tells me a hell of a lot more than a 1-minute gameplay trailer with more cuts than there are sovereign states. I'm looking at you, Battlefield 5 and Anthem. You know, that Battlefield 5 trailer, while better than the reveal which came before, it still wasn't that great in my opinion, in that it told me not a whole lot about how the game plays. I eventually came to discover that multiplayer gameplay had been made available online, and as it turns out, Battlefield 5 looks pretty great. So why didn't we get to see it at your show? Anthem looks wank, I'm sorry, but I think it's going to be a bad game, and that's not a statement I throw around lightly. I have to make an exception here though, because Anthem looks so painfully bland, vapid, and empty that I can't reserve much hope for it. It looks pretty, and the music is nice, but most games look and sound good. It'd be like saying, wow, this movie is great because the camera's in focus. This shared world shooter genre has brought about nothing but disappointment. Destiny 2 was the single most disappointing game I've ever played, and it took about 2 years for The Division to reach the state in which it should have launched in. The Division 2 is looking alright, but this is attempt number 2 for massive entertainment. I don't expect BioWare, a development studio that has resoundingly lost its pedigree, to pull it off when not even Bungie could. Especially when it's being published by EA, no chance. Oh cool, Vince Zampella is here to talk about a new Star Wars game. And then show us nothing. Not even a logo. Hey, at least General Grievous is coming to Battlefront 2. He's one of my favorite Star Wars characters. Shame I'm never gonna buy Battlefront 2. I don't buy that EA is actually sorry. To me, all of these moves that you're making are in an attempt to save face. I'll buy Battlefield 5, but you burnt that bridge with Battlefront 2. You burnt it and then carpet bombed it. At least the middle market games are looking good. You know, Unravel 2 seems pretty interesting, and so does that SOS game. Part of the reason why I liked what I saw was because the people presenting these games were clearly passionate about them. I didn't get that from anybody else. The atmosphere of this conference overall was so awkward. It's like nobody wanted to be there. But then again, I wouldn't have wanted to be there either because that was a shit conference. The worst one, by far. Next. Prior to E3, I got the feeling that Microsoft were going to do an alright job this time around, because if they didn't, they'd be screwed. A lot was riding on Microsoft coming into E3 2018 because the Xbox brand simply isn't doing that well at the moment. It's being consistently outpaced by the PS4 and, to the surprise of everybody, the Nintendo Switch. And with not a single major exclusive slated to release for the rest of 2018, things were looking pretty grim. I'm not entirely sure why people think Microsoft just turned it around convincingly, because 2018 is still looking barren for the Xbox One. With the delay of Crackdown 3, there's Forza Horizon 4, We Happy Few, and nothing else. I can't think of a single other Microsoft game releasing in 2018. That's pretty bad, especially considering how few games have released on the platform so far this year. It's for this reason that I have mixed feelings about Microsoft's E3 press conference. Judged purely as a game showcase, Microsoft's conference was great, but as a show intended to sell the Xbox One as a platform, it wasn't nearly as successful. One thing you can't say about Microsoft's E3 conference is that it lacked games. Of all the conferences this year, they definitely had the greatest number on display. Thing is, most of them were multi-platform games, which have nothing to do with Microsoft. Look, don't get me wrong here, Cyberpunk, Devil May Cry 5, Suikoden, and Metro Exodus all look fantastic, but I will be buying them on Steam, and PlayStation gamers will be buying them on PlayStation 4. If the goal here was to drive interest in the Xbox One, as in sell Xbox Ones to consumers, multi-platform games are not going to achieve that. People will buy them for the systems that they already own. The first-party titles they did announce and show, with the exception of Forza and We Happy Few, aren't releasing until next year. Ori and the Will of the Wisps, the first-party game I'm most looking forward to, isn't releasing until next year. Gears 5 isn't releasing until next year. Crackdown 3 is releasing next year, nearly 5 years after it was announced. The trailer for Halo Infinite, while great in the sense that it indicates a return to the franchise's roots, was more of a tech demo than anything else. I would be surprised if that game even releases in 2019. And cool, Microsoft are beginning to expand their portfolio of first-party studios. Good for them. But we didn't get to see the games they're making because they're probably nowhere near close to completion. The key takeaway from Microsoft's conference this year is that they aren't ready yet. They're taking steps towards cultivating a good first-party lineup, but it's still not here. It's all coming later. You just have to wait. But in the meantime, you'd be better off buying a PC. Next. When Bethesda's E3 conference drew to a close, at the time I thought they put on a genuinely good show. Rocky Start aside, Bethesda announced several new games, which for me is an important factor when deciding which conference I think was the most successful. But as I continued to ponder about their conference, I happened upon a teensy-weensy little problem. We didn't get to see any of those games. While it's great to know that Doom Eternal is on the way, what would be better is if we got to fucking see it. Same goes for Elder Scrolls 6, Starfield, and Wolfenstein Youngblood. In Bethesda's defense, they did show a lot of gameplay for Rage 2 and Fallout 76, and the fact that Fallout is going to release this year earns them some points as well. But it doesn't take a genius to deduce why we didn't get to see gameplay for most of their new announcements. They aren't coming out anytime soon. Bethesda don't need to host an E3 conference every year because they simply don't have enough games to warrant one. Even at their 2015 conference, which was their best, they only had 3 games. This particular show marked the most announcements from Bethesda at any one E3, but that means jack shit when we don't get to see those games. Even the promise of a new science fiction IP isn't enough to get me excited when I don't know what the hell it is. It wasn't a bad conference, but it does prove the point that Bethesda doesn't need to keep hosting them. They don't have enough games to justify it. Next. Not even worth talking about. Next. Of the big 3 gaming publishers, Ubisoft are definitely the best. They're not a perfect company by any means, but they aren't nearly as anti-consumer as EA or as painfully dull as Activision. Typically, Ubisoft does a good job at E3. Their catalogue of games is large enough and diverse enough to warrant a press conference, and they seem to try every year to drop huge announcements at their presentations. There have been some years in which their conference was the best of the entire expo. This was not that year. Ubisoft's E3 2018 conference was decent. Not bad, but not particularly remarkable. Much of that can be attributed to the lack of major game announcements this year, as well as an over-reliance on CGI trailers. Otherwise, it wasn't really that bad at all. I'm up for a new Trials game. A few days before E3 started, I was actually wondering if they were going to announce it. To my surprise, Assassin's Creed Odyssey doesn't look half bad. I've been uninterested in this series for several years at this point, but after hearing good things about Origins and seeing good things with Odyssey, it's definitely on my radar. The Division 2 also looks very promising, and I'm really glad to see that free DLC is starting to become the norm this generation. To know that these guys are very much committed to making the only good shared open world shooter on the market is commendable, and I think the improvements made to the Division since launch indicate that the devs are starting to figure out what works and what doesn't. Good showing for that game, in spite of the cringe-inducing voice acting. On the other hand, Beyond Good and Evil 2 kind of represents a major stumble for Ubisoft. It's clearly nowhere near done, and I wouldn't be surprised to find out it's releasing in 2020. We really have nothing to go off at the moment. It was announced too early, a common trend with E3 since the beginning of this console generation. Overall, I think Ubisoft's conference was alright. It wasn't great, but it wasn't bad either. It was certainly the most consistent conference of E3 2018. It didn't take me long to figure out my opinions on this one. Next. Sony's press conference was kind of bad. When Sony told us a few weeks back that they intended to focus mostly on 4 games, it spoke volumes to how unprepared they were, and it fucking showed. Sony blew their load in 2016, and now they're playing catch up on these games which aren't ready and were announced too early, and we still have no release dates for almost all of them. Most of these games are looking good, no doubt, and the show wasn't completely devoid of surprises, namely Neo 2, Control from Remedy, and the RE2 remake. But that was it, and they weren't exactly the centerpieces of the show. Sony opted to focus on 4 exclusive titles that we all knew about, and while that resulted in fairly lengthy demos for each game, I think it's apparent that they were padding out this conference. To my surprise, the 2 games I personally thought looked the best were not The Last of Us Part 2 or Death Stranding, but Ghost of Tsushima and Spider-Man. Ghost of Tsushima looks breathtaking, and it's got me super intrigued to see more. Sucker Punch has produced mostly great games. Second Son is definitely their worst one, but it seems like they're coming back strong. Spider-Man just looks like a ton of fun. Watching that demo and the footage shown after the press conference, I get the impression it's going to be a blast to play. Look, Death Stranding, I'm intrigued. I'm interested. Fantastic trailer like all the rest before it. But seriously, what is this game? It's been 2 years since it was announced and I still couldn't tell you what it's about. I don't mind if you keep the premise obtuse, but I don't know what you do in this game. What is the gameplay? Is it a stealth game? A third-person shooter? Role-playing action-adventure? I don't fucking know, and neither do you. By the 4th trailer, I should know what the damn game is about. The Last of Us 2 looks pretty great, but I'm very skeptical as to whether the AI is going to be this smart in the final game. I remember being blown away by the E3 2012 demo for the original game, mostly due to the balance of power AI system, which ended up being a fiction. It just wasn't in the game. But perhaps this time will be different. I mean, I hope so, because bad AI was one of the main negatives of The Last of Us. As for the actual combat, it looks very similar to the first game, and that's perfectly okay because the gameplay in the first game was pretty great, but the jump between Uncharted 3 and 4 with regards to gameplay was pretty staggering. The new features sets here aren't as plentiful, it doesn't seem. I'm also skeptical as to whether the mechanics will blend as seamlessly as they did in the demo. It all seems too conveniently cool to be replicated in real time, but we'll just have to wait and see. As you can no doubt tell from what I've said, for the most part, I like the games that were shown, but this conference was padded, exemplified by the fact that 20 minutes of the conference were wasted. I'm not sure who thought it was a good idea to have a 20-minute intermission during the middle of the show, but it was ill-advised at best and downright insulting to the people watching the live stream. The general consensus online is that Microsoft had the better press conference, and I think I agree with that assessment. Like I said before, as a game showcase, Microsoft's conference was far better and marked a noticeable improvement for the company by comparison to previous years. There were more games and more new announcements. However, as a buy into our ecosystem showcase, Sony is always going to have the edge over Microsoft because at the very least, the vast majority of the games shown at Sony's conference were Sony games as opposed to third-party games I'm just gonna buy on my PC. This was an underwhelming conference though, no doubt about it. Confused, poorly constructed, and lacking in content. Next. I'd be lying if I said Nintendo's conference wasn't a little disappointing. I expected big things from the Nintendo digital event this year, with the 3DS gradually being phased out. All of Nintendo's internal development studios are focusing on the Switch, and after an extremely successful first year, they need to keep up that momentum. While they have probably achieved this thanks to the rather excellent showing for Smash Bros. Ultimate, I was still left wanting. You know, when you take out Smash, it was a pretty subpar conference. Metroid Prime 4 was a no-show. Maybe I should have seen this coming. I imagine they only started working on the game shortly before the announcement trailer hit last year, but I was really hoping we'd get to see it. Yoshi has been delayed to next year, and there was no new trailer for that either. No More Heroes wasn't there too. And while we're on the subject, what is happening with Retro Studios? It's been more than 4 years since Tropical Freeze released. I want to know what those guys are up to. But, to Nintendo's credit, they only focused on 2018 titles. And unlike every single other conference, they didn't waste any time. No buzzwords to be found at this digital event. It was only 45 minutes long and the time really flew by. Smash looks phenomenal. I am so excited to pick that up in December. My jaw dropped when they announced that every single Smash character from Games Pass would be returning. Yeah, Sakurai is an absolute madman. He deserves a decade-long vacation after this game comes out. So Nintendo is also a difficult one to decipher for me. On the one hand, I'm disappointed that we didn't get to see more, and yet I wasn't all that disappointed whilst watching the digital event, because Smash looks fantastic, and so do a lot of the other games they showed off. Unlike Sony and Microsoft, with regards to exclusive games, 2018 is looking good for the Switch. Smash, because we actually got to see it. A lot of gaming press outlets have been awarding Cyberpunk 2077 as the game of E3, but none of us got to see that behind closed doors demo. I don't doubt that it's going to be a fantastic game, but I don't actually know that for sure, and neither do you, despite your optimism. There's a good few hours of Smash gameplay up online, and none of it is pre-scripted. It's being played on the stage, and it's fair to say that that demo is likely to be an accurate representation of the game given Nintendo's track record. And the game looks great, so I've got to go with Smash on this. However, there are a few other games which I am particularly excited for. As mentioned, I have high hopes for Cyberpunk 2077. With the Deus Ex franchise on hold, this is one of the few Cyberpunk games we have, and CD Projekt Red has a great track record. Ori and the Blind Forest was simply excellent, and I imagine Will of the Wisps is gonna be of the same quality, if not higher. I am very keen to see more of Devil May Cry 5 too. There aren't many combat-focused action games to be found at the moment. The time is right for Dante and Nero to make their comeback. Ghost of Tsushima looks very promising, and I am extremely excited to pick up Spider-Man in September. From Ubisoft, I actually have some optimism regarding The Division 2 and Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I am willing to give both franchises another chance off the heels of those demos. There's probably something I'm forgetting, but you get the idea. There are some very interesting games shown at E3 this year, despite the fact that I don't consider any single conference to have been all that great. E3 2018 was interesting, that's for damn sure. Unlike E3 2014, which just plain sucked, or E3 2016, which was good at the time but clearly not so fucking great in hindsight, E3 2018 was a real mixed bag. Not mediocre, but rather a cobbled mess of good and bad things. I had to really think about these conferences this time around, whereas years past it was easy to identify the winners and losers. There's no clear consensus on this year's E3, and much of that is predicated on the personal lens through which we as gamers view these conferences. In terms of the main three, Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo all messed up in different ways, but they also succeeded in different ways. It's for this reason that I simply cannot make up my mind on which conference I thought was the best. I just can't figure it out. I am truly baffled, which I never thought I would say about E3.